Welcome to Storyform Preaching. My name is Danny, and in this video, I'm going to help you wrap your mind around one of our three Storyform elements, plot. Here's the question we're going to answer today. How can an understanding of plot help you improve your next sermon? One of my favorite quotes that draws this out is from Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, who says that a good sermon is like a symphony. This is how Lloyd-Jones draws out what a symphonic sermon sounds like in his book. As the musical composer in the introduction to the symphony generally lets us into the secret of the various motifs he's going to take up, so the preacher should indicate the main theme and various divisions in the general introduction. You have a doctrine, an argument, a case which you want to argue out, and to reason and develop with the people. So, obviously, you must arrange your headings and divisions in such a way that point 1 leads to point number 2, and point number 2 leads to point number 3, etc. You must end on a climax, and everything should lead up to it in such a way that the great truth stands out, dominating everything that has been said, and the listeners go away with this in their minds. Then, to make absolutely certain of this, when you've ended the reason and the argument and you've arrived at this climax, you apply it all again. It is vital to the sermon that it should always end on this note of application or exhortation. I love Lloyd-Jones' quote because it really gets at the heart of what a good sermon feels like. Still, here's the problem with Lloyd-Jones' quote. Knowing your sermon is supposed to be like a symphony is not helpful because most of us don't know how to write a symphony. But I would guess that most of us do know how to write a story. So we have a great starting point. And there are many books out there on how to write effective stories, whether it's film, fiction, short stories, etc. And if we can understand how a sermon is like a story, we can use the tools of plot to write better sermons. So let's talk about it. 3 ways to use the tools of plot to write a better sermon. First, let's start with Aristotle's definition of story. A sermon should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. This means your sermon will most likely have an introduction, a main body, and a conclusion. But this also means that you can open up any book on plot formation and read about the mechanics of 3-act storytelling and apply those tips to your sermon. For example, did you know that almost every story devotes 25% of their time to Act 1, 50% of their time to Act 2, and 25% of their time to Act 3? Did you know that stories almost never introduce new characters after the 50% mark in the story? Did you know that halfway through most stories, the main character's mind changes and they start to run towards their enemy instead of away from it? You can take these tips and more and immediately start wrestling with how they'd apply to your next sermon. Second way plot can help you write a better sermon. Plot teaches us what should happen in each section of the sermon. In Act 1 of any work of narrative, we meet the main character and learn about the world they live in today. Something happens called the inciting incident where the main character's attention is hooked. In Act 1, the character wrestles with this call and embarks eventually on the journey ahead. And so let me ask you, can you imagine using any of these concepts in creating your next sermon introduction? Or how about in Act 2, where the character at the beginning of Act 2 has some fun learning the basic principles of the world they've been catapulted into? Something happens next that raises the stakes and shows them this journey is one they desperately need to take. As they approach the midpoint of the story, they start to get excited about the journey and they want to run towards their destination, not away from it. And then, right after the midpoint of the story, bad guys close in. And the main character realizes the journey is harder than they imagined. They find themselves in a dark and desperate place, needing rescue. But then, the key emerges that unlocks their dungeon door. They escape, sword in hand, ready to conquer their enemy. And in Act 3, the character returns to the world they started in, but they return transformed. In the encounters they have in the last few minutes of the story, we get to see tangibly what this transformation looks like and hear the moral of the story, the lesson we learned from the journey we've taken. If you've ever heard a fantastic sermon, chances are the preacher employed one or more of these plot points to draw you in, teach you something fun, show you how important this journey is, demonstrate the power of the gospel, or teach you how now you should live. Through the tools of plot, we learn what should happen in each section of the sermon. There's a chance you're still having a mental block right now because you're fixated on how a sermon is not like a work of narrative. In a sermon, you have 2 different worlds you're navigating between. You're taking your audience on a journey through the text of Scripture, but you're also speaking directly to real-life experiences in your congregation members. It's almost like a sermon is two distinct stories in one. In the introduction, you talk about life in this world, and the main body of the sermon is devoted to walking through the text of the scriptural world, and then the conclusion, you return to the main world, the real world, and you talk through how to live out the truths we've learned in our real-life contexts. So here's the question. Which tool of plot formation helps us straddle these two worlds? I'm glad you asked. The tool is a tool in narrative theory called frame narrative. This is the last way the tool of plot can help us write better sermons. Frame narrative helps us jump back and forth between the scriptures and the life of our congregation. Frame narrative is a tool used in famous movies like Princess Bride or Forrest Gump. In these films, there's actually two stories happening simultaneously. Princess Bride starts with a grandfather telling a bedtime story to his grandson, and then in Act 2, we move into the story world itself, filled with adventure. We pop back into the frame from time to time and find ourselves in the kid's bedroom, and then ultimately land back there again in Act 3 as the story closes. I'd encourage you to watch this movie, Princess Bride, this week with this question in mind. How can I apply this plot device to my next sermon to learn how to ebb and flow between the biblical world and the real-life experiences of my congregation? Now, before we close, I realize I haven't given you a ton of actionable items in this video. My hope was simply to open your mind to the connection between plot formation and sermon formation so you can start learning and using the tools of story theory to improve your sermon. So in the last few moments we have together, I would love to give you some next steps you can apply this week to improve your next sermon. First, tip number 1 this week is to start listening to good sermons with plot in mind. The next time a preacher does something that grabs your attention, ask, what did they just do and where did we see that in good stories? Maybe they do a good job painting a picture of a pre-transformed life in the introduction, or they make you feel the weight of being in the pit of despair near the end of Act 2. Maybe a climactic moment happens there that turns a light bulb on for you in a major way. Listen to your next sermon with storytelling in mind. And second, start engaging with works of narrative with sermons in mind. And go watch Forrest Gump, Princess Bride, or your favorite movie and ask, what can I take from this film and apply to my next sermon? Or if that's too out there for you, here's an easier step. Grab a book on story writing and do the same thing. Invisible Ink by Brian McDonald or Save the Cat by Blake Snyder are great places to start. And as you read, ask, what can I apply to preaching that I'm reading in this book? If you want more tools for your story formation journey, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to this channel before you go, and if you haven't watched our video on the 3 key elements of Storyform theory, check that one out too to find about the other 2 elements of effective preaching. And as always, if you want to go deeper, check out storyform.church. We're building a ton of resources to help you in this Storyform journey. And we even have a 30-minute webinar up right now that can help you improve your next sermon with the tools of story formation. So go check it out and don't hesitate to reach out along the way if I can help in any way.